Good afternoon. It's 5 o'clock on Tuesday, February the 8th, and welcome to What Comes Next Live. As always, we live stream this podcast, and then it goes out as a pod for the bulk of the audience to listen to, and some may watch it later on the website or on the YouTube channel. My guest this afternoon is Dr. Patricia Gestoso. And we met a little while ago, and I immediately thought to invite her on and to hear her thoughts. I'm down in London. She's actually up in the Manchester area. And bizarrely enough, I will be getting on a train up there this evening as soon as we finish recording to very close to where she's based, because I have business there in the morning. So I should be reading a book on the train later. But for now, here we are live, and welcome, Patricia.
Thank you very much, Tom, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here to continue, actually, our conversation. As a brief introduction, I'm an award-winning inclusion strategist, and I'm also a technologist. So basically, that is three hats. I have my consultancy, where I help leaders to leverage diversity and inclusion in their business strategy to boost innovation, reach top markets, and attract and retain talent. I also head of scientific support and customer operations for a large engineering software company. And third, I'm head of diversity and inclusion for a British nonprofit called We and AI that focuses on the increasing the awareness about the benefits and challenges of artificial intelligence.
Very, very cool. And in the show notes, which I don't go and edit afterwards, this goes out as it is, other than cleanup. But Patricia's eponymous website, which is her name, will have all of that information on it. So I already have a bunch of questions, but this is really your opportunity to talk about what's on your mind, what comes next, what's happening right now. So.
Wow. So let me start for three tenets, that inform my thinking. The first one is, for me, inclusion is a practice. It's not a certificate. The same thing that watching a football match doesn't make you, Cristiano Ronaldo. The second one is that when we look at diversity and inclusion as well as ethics, we see an intent impact gap. Okay, we feel and we think we are doing much better than we are actually doing. And the third one is that I believe that tech should be regulated and legislated as any other sector. So if we regulate farmers and if we regulate the food industry, we also need to regulate tech. So with that in mind, I think the good news, what I'm seeing now, is that I don't have, at least openly, the conversation about this diversity and inclusion thing is a trend, that I used to have in 2015 in the UK. Now, corporations, even, small providers, they tell you, oh yeah, this is important. Of course, we do see a lot of performative diversity and inclusion, okay? A lot of photos type of the Benetton of the 80s, thinking that this is it. Very, very focused. I still see a lot of focus only on the workplaces. And, companies, only the leaders really are understanding all the money they are losing, because if you don't integrate diversity and inclusion in the products, in the offering, in your marketing, sales and services and partners, then you are missing out. And of course, we are seeing, repercussions in the company's reputations. So I think we do begin now to, the train is going, is bad, we are we are still looking for the magic bullet, and this magic bullet now is called allyship. And allyship actually, in theory, looks very nice, because basically what it says is, depending on the environment we have different privileges, and the people that have privileges looks out to help the people that don't. So in theory, it looks very good. But imagine, Tom, that I see you with 7 suitcases, 3 bags, and I see you that you want to enter the building. I opened you the door, and I'm so happy because I was able to help you. I invested 2 seconds of my time, but you still are there, and your destination maybe is the 7th floor, and there is no lift. But me as an ally, I check that list today, that from the list. So I think that allyship, yes, theoretically, it does have, is a good idea, but I think it's very limited, because what we try is to decaffeinate actually what takes really to have an inclusive workplace. And other things, of course, now there is much pressure about metrics. That's clear. Diversity. So at the level of diversity, measure. As usually one category or identity at the time. You measure women, you measure LGBT communities, but still every time I want to have this conversation about intersectionality, that we know is not the same to, if you are a woman, it's not the same that if you are a Black woman. And if you are a Black woman, disabled, single mother, you basically are compounded. And that is a very difficult conversation. The other thing, let me see, I think I'm looking is that finally we are looking about coming now to the ethics and AI. I think for artificial intelligence, now this is very strong. The UK and also Europe are really, looking at the ethics area to regulate it. And people begin to understand that we cannot talk about ethics in artificial intelligence without diversity and inclusion.
Okay.
Because, for example, what we see with artificial intelligence is that the people that benefit are the people that always benefit. And the people that have challenges are the ones that experience most challenges of those technologies, because, for example, there are less data about them. For example, when we see that in clinical trials, the data we have is mostly for men, mostly are mostly for white people, are mostly for people that somehow live in cities, because are the ones that can go and do the clinical trials. So the drugs we have are mainly for that population.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
So I think that what I like is that now, for example, and it is a plug, I'm going next, I was invited in March 30th to the Scottish AA Artificial Intelligence Summit. And our neighbors have really focused in trustworthy AI, inclusive AI, and ethical AI. And I find that really really a very good progress to add that inclusion is necessary in technology. So that's really good. And the other thing I'm seeing is, even if I talk about performance, the diversity and inclusion that is performative, I think that we also see a lot of leaders that want to be coached in diversity and inclusion, to be fair. They understand that, again, it's a practice, that the same thing that you don't say, oh, I did an MBA 20 years ago, and now I don't have to study business models anymore. I'm done. No, you need to keep really, it's part of your business acumen. to read, be informed. So the same, I think I'm seeing really, leaders that they are getting the coaching they need. And the other thing I'm seeing recently is that, again, we talk only about artificial intelligence, but what about blockchain? What about the metaverse? Those, we cannot do like artificial intelligence and wait 10 years to regulate it. So it's quite concerning. For example, we are hearing about harassment in the metaverse.
So you're very passionate, enthusiastic. You've got a lot on your mind. What's the single most important thing you would like to communicate to an audience?
I think that the most important thing is that our intent is different than our impact. Our intent is different from our impact. So talk about that a little. I think that and I'm going to focus in tech products because are those that I think, I know more but also because tech is actually underpinning now almost all industries in some way or the other.
Yeah.
And I think that at the moment, the people that are designing technology belong to a very narrow group, population group. That's it, and they are creating sometimes great products. But of course, they are creating those products are catering only for them, for their needs. So we have a lot of tech products that are for rich kids.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Also, they are, for example, not necessarily designed for people with disabilities. Because again, sometimes people tell me, because the people in tech are like this, they don't care. I'm like, I'm working tech for, a lot of years, and I've never heard a developer tell me, Patricia, today I want to wake up and hopefully I will be able to create an app that is sexist or that is racist.
Yeah.
Maybe there is a 1% of population, but most developers want everybody to use their software. But the thing is that because you are just surrounded by what you know, and everybody agrees, we don't have, we have few women, we have very few people in tech that are not white or Asian. We have very few people that have disabilities. We have very, fewer people that belong to LGBTQ communities and so on. So of course, we only create those products and services. So this is why I think we need to interrogate between and really measure the impact we have.
So let me, right. So there's a gap between the intent we believe we have and the impact we're actually having. Let me throw a couple of thoughts around and tell me if they are similar, what they mean. And I've got a kind of question for you around the idea of inclusion strategist and what does that mean? I talk often to business leaders about bridging the gap between the need for diversity and the corporate need. And you talk about that, you talked about that already. It's in the first paragraph of your bio. Effectively, there's a huge risk and a commercial risk to having groupthink and sameness. The AI bit, and a great example is facial recognition often doesn't recognize non-white people, which is stunning, right? And we know, for example, whether it's AI, tech, or just healthcare, that the health outcomes for Black women in the UK in pregnancy are 20 times higher risk than white women. So our intent is not necessarily, our intent's different from our impact. Now, a story I just wrote about today is I live in an area that I put in my daily blog today, and it was titled, "Can you imagine a blues club with only white musicians?" All right. Now, instinctively, the blues is a music form that came out from oppressed Blacks in America, in the Deep South, right? And that's where it's from. And influenced all forms of popular music. But if you're going to have a blues club, right? So why am I aware of that? Because I saw pop up on a social media feed in the general area that I live in, a really successful 1 night a week blues club that's formed and is now up for national awards, and it's got a 2-year waiting list for bands to play on it. And it's quite close to me, and I could go down and watch blues on a 1 night a week. But then I saw the venue it's being held at. And the venue it's being held at is, let me put it this way, it's for people who've lived in the area for multiple generations. And it's a private members club, right? And this is a very diverse area, but within a mile or two, it becomes less and less diverse. I'm talking about ethnicity predominantly. I mean, one of the most diverse boroughs of London, but as soon as you leave it, it's all white people who've been here several generations. And I thought, that's a weird place for a blues club. So my kind of radar was up. So I noticed they had a YouTube channel with all of the bands that have played in the last several months. So I took about 15 minutes just skimming, a few seconds of each video of each band that's played the last few months. And in the last 3 months, so about a dozen performances, there was not one single non-white musician playing. Right? So I won't be going, right? Because it's a bit of a stance. But also, the thing for me that's interesting is I'm going to get to the idea of inclusion as a practice, because there is no growth. One of my movement practitioners I work with over years would say there is no growth without stretching. And there's a comfort zone piece that, as you said, I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning saying, I'm going to design an AI that's going to be, isn't going to recognize black faces because I'm a racist. But they go, well, I've designed things for tech bros like me or people like me. And people tend to surround themselves with people like themselves. I declined an invitation to a great business club last year because it was centered around golf. When I looked down the membership app, the first 100 faces were all men. Now, they weren't all white men, but they were all men. And yes, golf is not that commonly played by women, but there's a hell of a lot of women entrepreneurs that I work with. And I went, I'm just not going to be part of that. So it's interesting to me you talk about inclusion as a practice, because before you came on, I was thinking, what does the inclusion strategist do? Well, they're going to take the why, like if the leaders buy into the why, they're going to say, what do we need to do? And I guess the thought to me is, if I do yoga, or I've done yoga for a number of years, I've been a coach for well over a decade. If anybody was to refer to me as a master coach, I went, it's my practice. If anybody said to a yogi of 40 years standing, they say they practice yoga, right? I've been doing Pilates for well over a decade, and I'm relatively expert at it, but it's my practice. You're never there. You're always growing and learning. So I'm sorry, I'm really getting into this, but I'll finish in a second. After the Black Lives Matter thing exploded onto the scene in the UK, we saw lots of people, including family members, full of white guilt. I was never taught this at school. I didn't understand it, right? And an awful lot of performative allyship. An awful lot of, I will do what I can to help. And they've metaphorically opened a door for people who are carrying a lot of baggage, a lot of heavy weights that they have to carry through life, which those people opening the door have never had to carry and do not understand. But what did I mostly witness? It was about them.
Yeah.
It wasn't about understanding the life of the other people and having empathy for it. Now, I'm aware I'm saying this as a 6'3" white male, first language English, who did manage to go to a good university and get a professional qualification and all that kind of track. I've never had a tough life. I'm just interested in always stretching to be better and how can I learn? And that's one reason I'm talking to you. So from all of that, I'm particularly interested in your language around inclusion as a practice. So clearly you work with NGOs, governments, companies, organizations, but humans. You work with humans, right?
Yeah.
And what are the things that you find? How do you help people with their practice of inclusion?
I think I don't do 2 hours workshops. I don't do 1 hour unconscious bias training. I'm not saying that doesn't work. Those are tasks and activities. But really, when you go and you think that inclusion is a practice, you look at your processes as a company. What processes you do have? For example, easy, all your tools, are they accessible for employees and customers and partners or not? Because if you are already not, the tools are not accessible, meaning basically you are telling to 1.2 billion people in this planet saying, actually, we are not really so interested in you.
Yeah.
So even also, is a message for those that maybe don't need that accessibility, but that they say, okay, this is not taken seriously. So goes from the tools to really the processes. And those processes are not only hiring and promotion, are about your marketing. When I look at, and of course, this is an easy one, to your website, how that looks like. You are telling me you're a company, with a worldwide reach. But if I only see drawings of young, blonde, white girls and boys, I don't think that that kind of support, is that they are going to provide to me, or solution is going to really be targeted to me. Basically, again, they are telling me, if you're interested, just go with it. So this is why when I see practice, I really see about going through tools and through really, I do, you can see my background in business operations, to go and say, okay, first, the product we are creating. First, you need to acknowledge who we are. Maybe you just happen to be a bunch of white guys.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's, we can, but at least say, okay, where do you need? Then somehow you need that feedback from people that are not like you. Exactly. And that feedback needs to be through marketing, through groups, through testing, through monitoring. Your sales team, can they have conversations with people that are not like them? Because I do remember, quickly an anecdote, when I was in Canada, I've written about this during my PhD. I was in Quebec, and we had a request for proposal for a very expensive equipment called X-ray for samples, chemistry samples. And I remember at the first name of our director was Robert. Okay, so he sends to this very big company. We are talking about $1 million, okay, of purchasing order for, asking for a quote. And the person answers, "Hi, Bob. Greetings here from somewhere." So, Professor Robert said,
who's French, not English, yeah.
This person doesn't know that in Quebec, we are not Bob.
Yeah,
okay? Yeah. I'm a professor, and that's not my name, and that was all. That possibility evaporated.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good story. I mean, Canada is. I mean, language is another form of bias, and cultural things is another form of bias. I think it sounds like, you said you don't do, and honestly, I don't believe there's a place for 1 hour unconscious bias workshops. I have a slightly stronger opinion, but you don't do those. You don't do 2 hour workshops. You look at, getting involved and looking at it from a tools processes standpoint. It sounds like you are conscious around the clients you work with. So they have to be willing to adopt inclusion as a practice.
Exactly.
How do you go about finding those people, and how do you go about filtering those who aren't, or is there a filter? Would you work with anybody who is willing to learn?
I am, I'm very pleased actually when people are able to, have the willingness to learn. Okay. I'm delighted because, I think that as a leaders, the same that nobody had the map for COVID, I'm be a leader. But once a lot of leaders stepped up and said, okay, yeah, I wasn't taught that during my MBA, but, let's go with it. I do see leaders saying, I need to learn. Okay, and from it can go from, this is my personal, social media. Is there is something? And then they begin to see that, wow, they only maybe comment in people that looks like them, for example. Yeah. So you begin, and they appreciate the growth, and actually they become, so good to coach that they begin to be critical with their teams and providing coaching. And I think this is why leaders are very important, but we cannot, usually we work with leaders and then, they're allies. I think one thing that we are missing a lot is actually working with managers, because managers can really make it or break it in a team.
Yeah, by leader and manager, terms are important. I understand, because visually, for those on the audio, you were kind of almost doing a hierarchical pyramid with your hands at one moment. And you mean, as opposed to leaders being at the, and let's not get into a leader versus manager conversation, but you mean top of the tree versus within the organization.
Exactly, and it's very good point you caught me on that, because what I meant is boards and executive compare, maybe to middle managers. Thank you very much for bringing my attention.
And I'm, sharing experiences, because I do work mostly with people in executive leadership, and you see increasingly people will review their values as a company, and they might put diversity as one of the top values. But values can often be thought of as the soft stuff, but to me, they're the hardest measure and metric in business, only if they inform and the lens through which you view every decision you make. So imagine you're not only one of the exec team, but anybody who's then moving down, what I would say, inculcating, to use a kind of big word, but I don't shy away from big words anymore, really cascading that through the organization of, yes, and how does that process improvement make us more inclusive, right? Internally or externally or whatever. And, once that starts happening, people go, oh, okay, now then we can have a metric on, if we're doing I literally have a client that's doing a massive process improvement process right now. And what are the metrics they're using to determine the scorecard on the current processes and how they're going to improve them. So once diversity starts becoming led through the business, not just from the top is essential, but everywhere, then you start seeing it as being, that's just the way we do things around here.
Exactly. I think that this is the power that and when we were talking about, why I think, we need to look at practice, as inclusion as a practice, because of that, it's like you wanted to try to run a business and you said, yes, but I'm not going to look at the number of sales. I'm just going to look at it once a year and let's hope. No. So I think that then when you begin to see how so many of your customers are underserved, and you see that, like, you have, for example, in terms of restaurants, you have here, millions in the UK, millions of people, for example, with disabilities that are underserved.
Yeah.
Websites that actually, we know that people that need accessible websites, they leave, 70% leave a website because it's not accessible. So once you begin to really put metrics there and say, oh, actually, we want to do this, provide this product to the whole world, but we only actually works for people that are white and women, let's say, because we have a lot of that as well. Sure. But it doesn't work, for example, with non-white women, then you begin to say, oh, this is a potential, this is the bottom line. And I think that really switches for a lot of people. But as you said, I think we cannot have the same, we need to make things relevant to people. And for the moment, what we have is, for example, like the article of McKinsey, where they say, oh, boards, there is a percentage. And I think there are so many concrete examples, like the one of the X-ray, actually, that shows that there is a one-to-one correlation. That I think that's the challenge. The challenge is really to take this as a practice, and that needs continuous learning.
And humility. There is the work done by two Israeli behavioral economists years ago, Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, resulted in a Nobel Prize for one of them, because the other one had passed away.
Yeah, Amos passed away.
but they took the ancient Greek work of heuristics, shortcuts and biases, and made that the foundation of behavioral science. And here's a great example from the UK of a bias, a heuristic. Was as the first lockdown started to open up in May, June 2020, the great majority of the government lived in or around central London, right? And even if you have a multi-million-pound house, which many of them did, right, it's not fully detached. It doesn't have an entrance to the garden except through the house. So they basically made a rule that said, you can't have people in your garden, and the thinking that they actually said in press conferences, because they need to go through the house and we're not sure about people being indoors. To which huge amounts of people in the country went, I may not have a multi-million-pound house, but I live in a rural area. And, my father, for example, laughed about it because he lives in a rural area miles from anywhere, and his house is surrounded by access. You can walk into any part of it from any direction. But if somebody points that out to us, are we willing to learn? Do we have the humility to go, how can I learn from this? How can I stretch? How can I grow? How can I adopt inclusion as a practice? And yeah, so it's a massive topic, and I'm glad you're out there focusing on it. And I do think about Canada. You mentioned it. We've both done a lot of work in Canada. And the language, aside from the cultural nuances of whether you address somebody by their formal title in Quebec, or you would do the same in Vancouver, maybe not. The Google Translate is the methodology that many small Canadian businesses use, because it's less expensive than doing a bilingual website, and it appears to be compliant under the law. Nobody enforces it. And to be honest, everybody has the option to choose their market. They can say, look, my market is exclusively Anglophone people in Canada. That's my choice. It is regulated in Canada. And you mentioned a really important piece, which I'm going to cogitate on around even just my own website, is I've not made any effort to make it accessible. And it's important to me to be inclusive. So I'm going to look at that. I'm also, the other piece from a sheer business commerciality bit is, if you want to attract people towards you to whom inclusion is important, and they go on your website and can visibly see that that it's exclusive, that it doesn't consciously include everybody who could benefit from your product or service, they may walk away within that 7-second initial decision period of a website, because they're demonstrating to me that no matter what they say, they're not being inclusive. So as an immediate takeaway, I'm going to go look at my website and say, talk to my webmaster and go, hey, even for my small website, is it accessible?
Wow, you've made my day, Tom, today.
We try to reach one person at a time, right?
I tell you, inclusion is a practice. This is what I do every day. For me, this is as much as, talking to an organization. And when you talk about purpose, I will say, I talk more about people about legacy. What are you leaving us? What are you leaving to the next 7 generations? And then what your
You've
product.
read a good ancestor, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. Are you a good and because I think purpose sometimes, as you said, goes very much and values on the intent.
Yeah.
Legacy, it's like, wow, this is my impact.
Yeah, and last week my guest was John Alexander, who's written a book called Citizens.
Yeah.
And it's coming out March 17th. And I was looking to talk to him about how to apply that beyond social enterprise into larger companies. And I wrote a blog about it the next day. And I'm not looking at it right now because I'm wholly focused on you. What the line was, something along the line of, what is it you intend to do that is so big you will need help from other people? Meaning outside your organization, right? So really engaging with the citizenship. So that goes on to the thing that Roman Krasnarek mentions in his book, The Good Ancestor, referencing the concept of seventh generation thinking. Like, what are the impacts of our decisions 7 generations down the line?
Exactly, and I like very much the concept, and I follow a lot as well design, the movement of design thinking about citizens rather than users. Yeah. Because if instead of counting how many users, we will talk about digital citizens.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm conscious of your time. Yeah. I'll have to get a train in a few minutes. We could talk for ages. My action item from this meeting, and you're a process and tools person as well, so you'll like that, is I'm going to go and look at the accessibility of my own website. My key learning, in a sort of thing I'd always ask coaching clients at the end, what was your key learning? Was simply the line, inclusion is a practice. So those are my thoughts. And as always, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned a lot. And I'm glad we continued our previous conversation. I always like to leave my guest with the last word. So what closing thoughts and key messages might you have for our podcast audience?
I think that we need, following on inclusion is a practice. We need to step and think not about allyship, but about co-belonging and collaboration. We cannot have a workplace that is inclusive if we have, when it's inclusive only for us. So that piece of the co-belonging is very important because, I think we are all done with performative diversity and inclusion. We need to be bold, humble, but bold.
So creating a space where people feel they belong. Fantastic.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you, Patricia. It is Dr. Patricia. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's been a pleasure.